So I'd like to call tonight's board meeting to order for the Westford School Board at 6:30.
I'd like to call the U46 School Board to order at 6:30.
I'd like to call the Prudential Committee School Board to order at 6:30.
Welcome everyone tonight. Our common meeting topics are fairly short, but before we start, I'd like to ask if there are any changes or additions to the agenda that we need to be made aware of. Seeing none, we'll move to visitors and staff to be heard. See a few people here. Does anybody come to share some information? All right, moving on then to our common meeting topic, an update on our transition to the new unified board.
So I'll begin the evening by saying good evening, everyone. It's good to see you all. It's been a long time. Nice scarf, Kathy. It's been a long time since we've all been together, and I just wanted you to know that the Essex Westford Unified Union School District Board has been working every other week, it seems. Every 2 weeks they meet, and there's been monumental work being done there. And the purpose of tonight's carousel time is for you to be have the opportunity to ask questions and to be made aware of some of the work that they've been doing. Certainly, you're the folks that communities see as the communications people when they think of school boards right now, because you're the acting boards and you've had relationship over time. People know you, and as this transition happens, and if somebody in the community has a question about the budget or any of the work moving forward, they're more likely than not to probably reach out to their local boards until the actual transition happens. So during this period of time, we wanted to make sure that you had as much information and didn't have to research it on your own to be able to answer some of those questions. And since this is typically budget building time, we thought it would be important for you to know a little bit about how that work is moving forward. I've invited our CFO, Deke, to be here tonight. If you had any questions from any of the attachments included in the email or included in your org notes. The budget assumptions and guidelines are included within that. I wanted you to know that negotiations are underway for all of your teachers at this stage of the game. Proposals have been exchanged, and there's a good climate and working relationship with those groups. So that work is going well. I think that probably I'll turn to Martha to give an update on the superintendent search. If this is a good time. Yeah.
Okay. I think all the pertinent information is in the letter that was in the org notes. At this point, the board is pretty divorced from the search in that we turned the first steps of the process over to the Superintendent Search Advisory Committee. They're working with a consultant, Brian O'Regan, who's very skilled in this work. He actually worked with our boards when we hired Judy. So that committee has done a first round of interviews. They've selected people to come back for a second round this week. And then they'll be doing work to try to choose finalists. And the Unified Union Board will interview the finalists and make the decision after hearing from the advisory committee. So I think the original pool was 30 candidates, which is actually, I think, quite good for an open position in Vermont. We made a decision to really target our advertising to Vermont and a little bit to New England. And because of School Spring, we can get applications from anywhere. we thought if we had applications from afar, particularly from folks who had connections to Vermont in some way, that might be reasonable. Dan French, who is our project manager for the merger of the two districts, has been working a little bit with Brian, and Brian and Dan have used their networks in Vermont, I think effectively, as far as I know, to encourage applications from folks that they think would be good candidates. So I'm happy to answer questions. We are hoping that the finalists will spend a day in the districts and that there will be some opportunity for community members, staff, students to interact with them in some way. And we'll have to figure out the logistics of that once we know how many finalists there are. I don't know who's first.
The one thing at our last meeting, we did have a community member speak to our board, the Unified Union Board. They were concerned because there weren't current educators from K through 8 on the advisory board. And we put out the letters to all the districts. We even invited people. And the main thing is, I'm not worried about it. So if you get asked about it, because you got some principals that are K through 8 principals that are there, and you have a couple of retired people on that board. If you look at the lists of names, you have some retired people that worked with K through 8.
A little later in the process, but once we have a candidate that accepts, when is the projected start date? Is
July 1st.
So that individual is not going to be able to participate in
That's
that.
highly unlikely. I think most of these are folks, most if not all of these folks will be currently employed, probably in school systems. So I imagine, there's some possibility that they'll use some of their personal or vacation time to try to spend some time in the district, but we'll have to see how that works out.
Next in the organizational notes, we included a transition organizational chart. So you begin to see the structure that we're recommending for next year as far as a high-level central office piece. And I'd be happy to answer if there were any questions on that or have other people here. It was important for budgeting purposes to identify that's the place where the governance change is going to have the most impact as far as people are concerned and positions. So those folks, many of which are assuming many of the responsibilities currently for the transition process, are working hard to work with the transition to a new finance system. We have purchased Tyler, and we've been working through that along with the change in the chart of accounts that happens simultaneously, so getting that organized. A lot of it is just behind the scenes kind of work that takes a lot of time, and heavy on HR and finance, and also talking about what does curriculum look like moving forward in a K-12 environment, and our work towards proficiency-based learning. So there's work across the gamut, and these are the folks that have been currently identified. I wanted to point out for sure that it's a key time to look at it through a transition lens. We don't know what we're going to need into the future, but I'm most hopeful that the new superintendent will be wrapped with the support from both systems of highly knowledgeable and experienced executive directors. So I'll answer any questions on that information if you had any.
This is something that's been asked, and I don't know if we even have gone to that point yet, but I know that their offices are going to be in 2 different locations. Do we know like what departments are going where yet, or who's going what, or are we going to decide? Is the unified board going to decide that before the new superintendent comes along, or do we want to give this new person
The opportunity.
power to, yeah.
That's what the executive directors will help inform that decision. But certainly we want to have the new superintendent have an opportunity to see what makes most sense between the 2 locations. It is a challenge. It's going to be a challenge to be in 2 locations, but nothing that can't be dealt with for the first couple years of operation until there's a plan moving forward. So I think that the board has been very sensitive to that, and like groups will probably manage to stay together. So we have operations identified, and we have curriculum instruction and student support. So we're looking at maybe considering the superintendent being located a couple days a week in one office and a couple days a week in the other office, and so that there's that opportunity, as well as cabinet meetings that'll take place probably weekly in the beginning. So the location is of concern, but of greater concern is the fact that conference room space is very limited. So places to have meetings is going to be something we have to figure out too. So space is always something that during times of transition you have to figure out along with personnel. So that is going to be another conversation down the road where folks are going to be. Wanted to encourage folks that live in Essex Junction and Essex Town to remind them that there's a vote coming up for the Essex Parks and Recreation Study on December 13th. And just to remind folks the importance of that vote and to get the vote out. There's also an engagement group, and Liz, did you want to provide, or Mark, as part of that engagement work that you're doing with the new board?
Sure. So the Nellie May initiative is well underway, and we spend every night every week in October we met 4 times with a group of 23 people from Westford, Essex Town, Essex Village. We had 7 students in that group to really start to frame what engagement can look like and help inform the new board what kinds of things the community wants to have a say in and how that can happen. What kind of strategies we can use to make sure that the community is feeling like they have a voice in decisions that get made. That group then split up into a steering committee, which met for the first time last week. 2 meetings are scheduled of that smaller group. And this smaller group will take the recommendations of the work over the last month and start to implement some of those recommendations basically in 4 areas. Those areas are transportation, vision, student voice. What's the 4th one, Mark?
It was around personalized learning plans.
And personalized learning plans, learning opportunities. Yeah. So these 4 buckets of work are where we're putting our energy now. And as I said, the next meeting is taking place on December 13th, the same day as the vote. And we are we submitted our report to the Nellie May Foundation, was due at the end of November, with an implementation plan, and that implementation plan includes this steering committee that's now formed and the work that will happen over the next 2 years to realize that plan.
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting that it might be a little difficult to understand how a lot of our groups have common connections. The same people seem to sit in multiple chairs, right? Either this board, the unified board, different committees, town or school. So, the real goal is for all of us to become, I think, a bit more adept at understanding how to internalize engagement and have it be a part of our culture, rather than be a bit reactionary to whatever might be the topic that comes up in a given school year. So part of successful engagement is really turning the model over to where the community has a great deal of say from the beginning. There's buy-in, and I think one of the quotes that came from the meeting that stuck most with me is, it's supposed to be uncomfortable. It's messy. We can't necessarily control it, because when you get input from all the people around you, it's quite different than being in a room with the folks you've worked with for years. But that, I think, is one of the key pieces that's going to make us successful in the future. And it's the community that decided the unification was the right direction, and it was through a very good engagement effort. We need to learn from that and build.
Yes, and this effort is, as Mark is saying, one of the takeaways and what came out strong in that month of meetings was this getting rid of these siloed Essex Town, Essex Junction, Westford. We are one now, and moving towards that cultural shift by making sure that we are changing the way that we interact is part of the overall goal of this initiative.
And yet it'll be confusing because you're still the boards that are operational as far as the schools currently. So that means those of you I've included in all of the org notes whose terms will be expiring, to please be aware of that so that you can take out petitions. It's really important. I beg you from the bottom of my heart that you consider serving until probably the date will be December 31st, 2017, when CCSU boards will close operations. So I wanted to make sure, especially PC, since there's 3 of you, which is a quorum, to make sure that you remember to get your petitions, and that'll come right up for Westford, because you'll be voting on town meeting for that. So we're still in different timelines, responsible for different pieces. The other thing to know is that DEEC is constructing the budget in a way that there'll be fund balances brought forward to support your work with closing your audits after this year. So that audit will take place in the fall. So we're ensuring there's all of those little things that we have to remember, because we'll be out of cycle and still managing 2 systems. So SunGuard still needs to be in operation as we're closing down that financial system, as we're learning the new system, and those are the pieces that are making a lot of complexity for us to deal with. On top of it all, we always should expect the unexpected, and our demographer, Ken Jones, for 2 years, is no longer doing that work. So Deek came in with a new skill set that she can now add to her resume as our first-time demographer as well. And the projections are included for each individual board, so you can look and see what your October 1st enrollment counts are. And that'll help inform the new board how to budget appropriately as far as the numbers of students that we're projecting.
How brave is Deke? We can blame her for budgeting. Student numbers.
Trying to think if there was something else. Are there any questions for Deke about any? Oh, Brian had asked a good question in preparation for this meeting. He had said, well, we've always approved tuition as a U46 board, and all of those important milestones and decisions that you've made as local boards, that will all transfer now to the new boards. So in any way, shape, or form that you can be involved or help inform and be great ambassadors for the work of the new board, that will be immensely appreciated going forward. I'm certain of that. Annual meeting will be April 10th for the new board, and the school budget vote is April 11th. So there's a lot of work going on right now. The first budget that the new board will see will be the 16-17 budget and what it would look like if it were combined this year. So starting to see what a combined budget would look like, and that's called a base budget. And the new board will be looking at that during this month as they prepare for their first look at a 17-18 budget. Any other questions? I think these org notes were 90 pages.
Okay. So I appreciated a great deal of the explanation of the methodology of budgeting, especially the way that you chose to deal with existing versus additive, and I feel like that's going to go a long way to helping people understand how to go from reading what we were used to in one respect versus others. But I am wondering how much outreach, how much training do we basically have in place to let our townspeople know how to interpret this. As Judy mentioned, in Westford, we would be doing our budgeting work now in meetings in front of the town and bringing it to our draft budget to folks for a January meeting. So I haven't gotten any questions from townspeople yet, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be challenging for them to understand how that all works together. Just the fact that we're going to have commingled budgets and votes seems to be information that folks are struggling to get used to. Do you have any ideas, plans, suggestions on how to make this move forward smoothly?
So, all goes according to plan, and it's working that way. The first thing out will be a 16 as if it were unified, the individual voter approved budgets, and then the roll-up. So you will be able to look across and see where the voters in your district approved your budget and how it fits into that total number. So I'm doing my best to try and make sure that people can see themselves in that much bigger number and can understand how those pieces are. And that's the challenge is there's two different charts of accounts, and the way we've interpreted some of those account numbers are different. So software might mean something on one side, but it doesn't mean subscription. There's a lot of those little pieces now. But my hope is to do a pretty good job of showing, based on likely per pupil cost, how that trends and how that all works together, so that the end result isn't as scary as $72 million, which is probably about what the combined budgets are going to be. Does that make sense? I'm always willing to hear. I don't know your communities. I knew in my old community how to communicate. Heck, I was related to like a third of them. And that's really different. So any advice that you have, maybe not in this format, but I'd be more than happy to listen.
Question. Will you be able to, so you're going to project a 15-16 budget combined. Would you be able to delve into what the tax rates may look like for each community? And is that the impossible, or?
Well, the challenge with that is it's always the impossible, because I
Sure.
now have a yield number, and last year, if you remember it, I think the yield number, which is how you set the tax rate, dropped, I don't know, it was significant. And so the tax rates went up significantly at the end. So I'll do the best I can. The CLAs are so close that they may not be really that hard to deal with. What I'm really worried about is the yield rate that I have. So last year it was $9,701. It went up to $10,085, I think. I just don't see that getting through the legislature. I just see at some point that changing, and we won't know when. So that's what makes tax rates so hard. So I'll have equalized pupil on December 15th, so that gives me one hard number. It's that second hard number that is just, you just don't know until the legislature is well into the session what they're gonna do.
Martha?
Just to add to that, I think it's always important that we remember that we vote on budgets, we don't vote on tax rates, and that we project tax rates because folks want to have some kind of understanding. But I think Deke is absolutely right, and there's no way, unfortunately, although the legislature has tried and tried and tried to figure out a way to have an absolute number prior to knowing what all the school budgets are, because it's the combined school budgets of the state that determine the number in the end. So the tax department is projecting what school budgets might do, but none of us know what they'll actually do until after they go to the voters and the voters make decisions. So.
With that said, though, I know we've always operated where we've been able to project a tax rate, and then as we get closer to the finalization, we provided a scenario that if this will be that.
Right.
And I think this is what I'm driving at is, I understand we don't have the absolute, but I think it's important to see.
We'll still do that.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, new governor, new lieutenant governor,
New
House,
president.
new speaker,
Speaker.
new Senate majority leader.
Hopefully not new
You
secretary.
know, as a new person myself, I just
Sure.
appreciate what that learning curve is going to be. And they have many more moving parts than I have to deal with, so.
I'm just curious on how the required communication of annual reports is gonna work. So I'm imagining we produce our individual district reports as we've done before, which has a historic nature to it, but usually includes the budget, and this would, I presume, would include the entire budget, right?
That it has to, so it would have to include that. I'm looking at that budget format too, because the way the two communities looked at budgets, the level of detail, the three, because Westford looks at a way different detail even than the Essex Junction and Essex Town. So there's a lot to sort of negotiate as we go through that, but there would be one budget.
And we'll each have a warning that, because we have a functioning school district through June 30th. So we'll need a warning of typical nature.
Yes, yeah. Now
But not a
Westford
budget
won't
warning.
have their, the budget in their annual report because their deadline for their annual report will be sooner, and you won't have a budget by then. But in the other two communities, it's the same timeline, so.
But that brings up, but Brian raises an interesting point. Does Westford need an annual meeting and to approve those sort of standard articles about borrowing money and that kind of thing, or is it not necessary this year?
The question, well, you'll still have the board member vote
Right.
piece, so you'll have to have that warned for sure.
Right.
And the borrowing money piece, I'm uncertain if we would need that, but we'll have legal counsel help guide us
Yeah.
through.
I think there
that
would be some
morning.
questions about what the existing board's
Needs minimally.
meetings
Yeah.
should.
So I saw Marla had a hand, then Andre.
If I could too, that question actually extends into next year, because part of the annual report is the look back, and you would own the look back as a legacy board, right? You own 17.
Sure.
So that's what there's a lot of moving parts to try and make sure we've got covered, because at some point, I think you're gonna have to approve that if they're yours.
Yes. You'll have to approve your audit for sure.
Well,
How?
I want the actuals.
I'm trying to wrap my head around this because all the local boards right now are still going to be operating till December 31st. We found out we're going to have a budget for audits for the local boards. So are we, as a local board, for instance, the PC, on April 10th, I think is our annual meeting also, are we going to have a separate budget that we're having the public vote on for the PC?
What are we, as near as we can tell through legal counsel, the appropriate or the best way to do that is to reserve fund balance and assign it to that process. So, and I just looked at the 16 fund balances, they're all healthy. I just got them today, so pardon me for, I wish I could hand them out, but I literally just got, and I still don't have the final audit draft. Where Chris and I think I agree, and I checked with the state, if you take the fund balance and reserve a small piece of it for your board, and then you spend out of that fund balance, then you don't need to raise tax, you don't need to have a tax item. And I think that's going to be both appropriate and easiest, because that's a really minuscule amount in the context of the budget. It's going to be 50, I think, for you folks, it was 54 or 55,000 this year for all four.
So do we have to have an article, each of the boards have an article authorizing that reserve fund to be used?
I believe so, but I need to work through Chris, because it's different in the school, and it's different given the combination. We had an early conversation with Chris, and I think we're on the same page. We just don't know the mechanics of that exactly yet.
last question here.
I think some of the authoritative votes that take place are actually not germane anymore, because we have the authority through June 30th, 2017,
Sure.
as far as borrowing the right to borrow money, because we see it through the end, but July 1st, the district's no longer going to exist per se.
No, I don't know that we do. Actually, I think that authority only goes from March to March.
I thought,
March
I understood it was always during the school year, but
The wording that I'm looking at does say next fiscal year,
Oh, okay.
so it's June.
So you're right.
Thank you.
but
So you just get to see a glimpse of all the questions that come up on a daily basis. And
Sounds like there's a lot of details yet in the
There
works.
there is a lot. I was pleased, and I think Dee can speak to the CCSU schools and the budgets for each of your districts. Our audit was clean.
Audit was clean. Everybody did very, very well. And like I said, I just saw it for the first time in detail this afternoon. So, but there is an addition to fund balance almost across the board. So everybody's in good financial health, and there was no findings that we know of now. So
I'm very proud of that.
I have to say that accountant Kathy Barron, who's just really knows this stuff cold.
She knows every penny and tracks it through thoroughly. So it's always healthy to enter into a unified new board being really healthy. And so we're healthy in our finances and our systems in general. Curriculum instruction, assessments, we're in a good place. So we just have all these little details to figure out along the way and how to do things. But appreciated Dee coming on, and just, I think, what is this week, 16 or something, and all she has managed during this short period of time, and the fact that all 6 directors and the 2 other directors in Essex Town have all stayed strong through this and pitched in extra time and support to make sure this is as seamless as possible going forward.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Oh.
and I just think this is a good time to say that CCU is blessed with fabulous employees and a fabulous superintendent, and it is making this transition doable. We're doing something that's not happening anywhere else in the state, and so it's very challenging to bring two superintendencies and two cultures together. And without the fine employees that we have, it would be much more challenging. So it seems like an opportune time to say how blessed we are.
Thank you.
You're here.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna ask any further questions we can just take to the individuals after the fact. That brings us to our recess. We're a little bit over, so after a 5-minute break, we should reconvene as our individual boards. I believe Westford is gonna be over here. U46 stays here.
Oh, we're staying here. No, we're going over there.
PC stays here, U46 moves. So I'll put us in recess for the Westford board at 7:07.
So recess the U46 board at 7:07. Working with you.
I'll recess the Prudential Committee Board at 7:09.
Which I don't know if I-
We stay.